Mara, what kind of season was this for Mainz? It looked at some stage as if they would be struggling a little bit. Then it looked as if they might finish in Europe. Then towards the end of the season, they had a pretty ropey last few games before that final game, of course, which was quite dramatic. And in the end, they're bang in the middle of the table, 9th. Do you feel, especially in light of the success of teams like Union Berlin and Freiburg, that this was a missed opportunity in some ways for this side?
Hard to say, really. I think if you look at teams like Union Berlin, which you just mentioned, of course, they have been together in the constellation they are now for a longer time than Mainz. And if you keep in mind that only 2.5 seasons ago, coach Bo Svensson, Christian Heidel, and Martin Schmidt returned to Mainz, and Mainz was really in a great danger of being relegated. I think there has been quite, well, you can see how they're evolving as a team. And of course, if in a season, and really it's the second season in a row, you're so close to going to Europe, because last year there was that one game, if you look back on the season in Cologne, you were leading 2-0 and then you lost 2-3. And then this year you had the game against Eintracht Frankfurt. And there's this one match where you can look back on and say, well, maybe if that would have gone differently. But as a whole, I think they have stabilized. And I know some fans don't like to hear that, but I think it's a season you can build on in the next one.
What do you think needs to happen for Mainz to have a bit more consistency? They had this really good run, as we said, in the second half of the season, but then they had this terrible run towards the end where they lost 4 in a row, some of those games quite heavily. Are these fluctuations normal for a mid-table team? Is there anything they can do differently within the existing setup to find more consistency?
I think there's a couple of things to consider if you talk about consistency. It's been a big topic around Mainz in that last season once again. And I think a lot of people tend to say they're not consistent because they have those phases, and they have better phases and phases in which they're worse. But really, if you look closer, there's some consistency within that, because they're not a team that wins a game, loses a game, loses a second game, wins a game. They have these clear phases. So what I think they need to do for the next season is, in the phases in which they do not drop as low as they did at the end of the season, and try to lengthen the phases in which they really succeed. And if you look at the past season and you see how in the winter break they really made strong additions to the team that helped them, and the second half of the season was much better than the first half of the season if you just look at the points. So I really think this I can't come up with the word. Verbesserung, total bescheuert.
Improvement.
Ach ja, genau. So I really think the improvement has already started in that second part of the season, and they can build on that. I think what's crucial is if they will be able to keep all what you would say the key players in the summer, which a lot of times a team like Mainz 05 will not. So there has probably to be the one or other addition for the next season, but that really is about it. I think the way Bo Svensson looks at the game and lets the team play is really a perfect fit for Mainz.
To put maybe a positive slant on the season, which by definition you can't really quite easily categorize because it finished right in the middle between good or bad. Good and bad, though, the points were perhaps much closer to a European success than relegation. Is it maybe good news that the Bo Svensson hype wasn't dialed up a bit more, because that makes this summer and next season a quieter place to be as far as him staying and the a good chance that there's not going to be upheaval, because his stock is maybe not quite as high as it would have been if he'd only picked up 4 or 5 more points.
I want to say 3 things to that. First, I really think if you look at the teams that got relegated and the big names that the league is losing, there is a quite positive touch to the season. You know, as Mainz 05, you never had anything to do with, you know, looking down the table. You were like safe on all the match games, on all the match days. So that really is a positive thing. Then talking about Bo Svensson and the question about the hype, I think if Bo Svensson was doing the job he's doing in Mainz, in a club that's a little bit more in the focus, the hype would, you know, be through the roof already, because he's doing a great job. And the third thing, I think Bo Svensson will be the perfect fit for Mainz as long as he's hungry for working for the club. When the moment arrives, and someday it will arrive, when he looks in his heart and finds, I want to do something different, then that's the point where you have to let him go. But I think a hype around his person is not something that will, you know, take him away from the club.
Okay. We know, of course, that Mainz coaches have a fantastic reputation, especially when Christian Heidel is there. He discovered or uncovered Jürgen Klopp. He discovered Thomas Tuchel, and in Bo Svensson, I think that's someone that a lot of people believe he might be destined to one day hit similar heights, but as you said, that day hasn't come yet, and maybe it's good for Mainz that the attention isn't quite as centered on him yet. You talked about his fantastic work. Can you perhaps sum up, after a few years with different coaches and a kind of a up and down, and maybe the fear that Mainz had lost a little bit its sense of direction, and what made it quite unique as a club in connection with the fans and the city, how him and Christian Heidel and Schmidt perhaps as well have been able to recreate that Mainz vibe of old that used to be one of the big reasons why they were so successful under Klopp and Tuchel?
I think a lot of clubs in the league by now talk about themselves being familiar. You know, they have that sense of familiarity. And for a club the size of Mainz, it's really important to know your identity. And for me, a big part of that identity, you know how the youth, the U19, they won the league this season. So you have to look at how the club is built from the bottom up. And in Mainz, you don't only have great work with the young players, but you also have a great work with the coaches. And I think that's really essential. And if you look at Bo Svensson, he was not only a player, which of course makes him understand the identity of the club very well, but he was also a youth coach, and a very successful one at that, because that's why he got an offer from another club to leave Mainz. And there's a little tendency to overlook Martin Schmidt, but he also was a youth coach at Mainz 05 before he became the coach of the first team. He had a lot to do with taking Thomas Tuchel into the club. And so I think the coach being the center of it all really is a huge part of the identity at Mainz 05. And that is, of course, something that Christian Heidel established and that he understands probably better than anyone else. And there was with Sandro Schwarz, another coach that came out of the club and that maybe could have gone a similar way than the other ones did. But it was at a time where there was a lot of pressure from the outside onto the club because people thought they have been in the first league for such a long time. We need more involvement. They need to go to Europe. But for Mainz 05, it's still a success to have nothing to do with relegation and to have people leading the club understanding this is key, really.
Mm-hmm. And what's next for this Mainz team? Do you anticipate any interesting arrivals? Do we see one or two key players perhaps leaving, as is often the case with clubs of Mainz's sizes, that they have to sell one or two players each season to balance the book and to also make way for new and younger players? What kind of changes to the squad do you think we will see, and where will that leave Mainz as far as the next season is concerned?
Well, something that Christian Heidel emphasized at the end of the season when he talked to the media was, it's a sentence he likes to repeat: we do not have to sell anyone. You know, it's all optional. And that for a club of the size of Mainz is really astonishing in itself. Of course, you have players like Leandro Barreiro, played especially a fantastic second half of the season, where you have to wait and see which offers may arrive. And if the club decides, okay, that is such a big amount of money, we will let him go. And of course, the players themselves have a say in it. But there's really no financial pressure to sell players. If you look at a player like Aaron Martin, they could have sold him in the winter and still got a little money out of him, but they decided, no, we want to have him until the end of his contract. And if he leaves after that and we don't get any money, that's all right. And then they sat together at the end of the season and decided, no, okay, we'll part ways. I think it's really important that players like Karim Onisivo, he already extended his contract. It'll be interesting to see what they will do on the position of the goalkeeper. Robin Zentner has beaten the other goalkeepers for quite some seasons now. But now that Finn Dahmen has left the club and gone to Augsburg, there's going to be, well, probably an addition to the squad, and it'll be interesting if he'll be second or third. But it's only really details. And I think, again, if you look at the additions they made in the winter with Hanko Olsen and Ajorg, that's the kind of players that can really make a difference in Mainz. But the squad as it is right now could really go into the next season, and there had to be no hesitation.